12-year-old black girl sits on her bed, staring at an invitation to a slumber party. It's from a classmate at school, one of the many classmates whose houses she's never been allowed to visit. She already knows what her parents will say. By now, the refrain is familiar. "I'm sorry, honey, but you're not going. You can invite your friends to our house if you want, but you're not sleeping over there." There's little room for debate. She feels a pang of embarrassment as she thinks about telling her friend she can't come. In her predominantly white school, she's already one of the only black kids in her class. Being the girl who isn't allowed to do sleepovers only makes her feel more isolated. It's hard for her to understand. The friend's family is nice. The neighborhood is safe. Why are her parents so adamant about this rule? For many black children, this scenario is a rite of passage as common as the sleepover itself. Black people don't do sleepovers. They joke later in life with humor that carries a quiet sadness. As kids, it just felt like a frustrating quirk of strict parents. It's only years later that the real reasons become clear. In this video, we're going to unpack what that rule was really about. The risks the many black parents recognize instantly, and the dark history that turned a simple sleepover into something far more serious. Before we go any further, take a moment to subscribe if stories like this matter to you. Too many of these experiences are laughed off, minimized, or left untold. Your support helps ensure these stories are preserved, shared, and understood beyond those who lived them. Now let's begin. In a personal essay for The Atlantic, New York City writer Brianna Holt reflected on her experience. Remembering her childhood, she described how her mom and dad shut down every sleepover request with unwavering certainty. In grade school, their strict rules kept me from going to classmates' sleepovers, she said. I attended a predominantly white Catholic school, and as one of the few black kids in my class, I already struggled to fit in. Being the weird kid who couldn't go to anyone's house didn't help. At the time, she felt left out and resentful. When she'd beg to go stay at a friend's, her parents' only answer was, "You'll understand when you're older." And as she grew older, her perspective did begin to shift. The first cracks in her childish indignation appeared one afternoon at the mall. By then a teenager, she was finally allowed to go on a parent-free outing with a white friend. The two girls wandered through stores like any carefree kids, until the carefree part abruptly ended. In a trendy boutique, she noticed a friend slipping jewelry into her purse. Alarmed, she refused to join in the shoplifting, but before she could process what was happening, a store clerk accused her of stealing. Security was called. The black girl, not the white friend, was singled out, searched, even threatened with arrest. She stood there crying and terrified as shoppers stared. Meanwhile, her friend, the real thief, hung back silent and unchallenged. Only when another customer spoke up to say, "Check the other girl's bag," did the truth emerge. The stolen items were in the white friend's possession all along. The authorities let both girls go with a mild scolding. No apology came her way for the false accusation. Her friend's only response was a shrug, as if it were no big deal. It was a big deal. Riding home, the black teen realized how narrowly she had escaped a life-altering disaster. She couldn't help but think, if that bystander hadn't intervened, she might have ended up in handcuffs for something she didn't do. When she told her parents what happened, they were shaken but not exactly shocked. This was the sort of situation they had feared all along. They worried that if we kids got into trouble, I'd be more likely to be blamed, she later explained, recalling the conversation when she finally confronted them about their rules. Her parents confirmed what she had suspected. It's not that we don't trust you. It's that we don't trust that the world will treat you fairly. They didn't like the idea of their black child being in a situation where, if something went wrong, she'd have no one to stand up for her. In that moment, sitting with the sting of an unjust accusation, the young woman did begin to understand. Her parents' strict stance on things like sleepovers was never about being mean or overly cautious for no reason. It was about protection. The dangers they imagined weren't monsters under the bed. They were very real biases and perils that black people face, even in the most ordinary settings. I realized that smaller everyday rules were coming from that same place of wanting to protect me from a racist society, she said later, with equal measures of gratitude and frustration. She had learned the hard way that her parents' fears were not paranoia. If anything, they were proven true. Now, to truly grasp why black parents worry so much, one must step back and see how history planted the seeds of caution. The narrative of no sleepovers didn't appear out of thin air. It was forged in moments of injustice that have left scars on the collective black memory. Long before sleepovers entered the American lexicon, black parents were fighting to protect their children from a hostile world. In the early 20th century, especially in the segregated South, simply surviving the night could be a perilous endeavor for a black person in the wrong place. There's a grim saying older black folks sometimes invoke: we had to stay awake so our children could sleep. It speaks to the vigilance that parenting a black child has always required. To understand the origin of that vigilance, consider a tragic story from 1955, one that still haunts the American conscience. That summer, a 14-year-old black boy named Emmett Till begged his mother for permission to go visit relatives down south. Emmett was a city kid from Chicago, boisterous and self-assured, blissfully unaware of the depth of racial hatred simmering in Mississippi, where he wanted to vacation. His mother, Mamie Till, didn't want him to go. In fact, she was extremely reluctant to send her only child into the Deep South's racial tinderbox. Mamie knew that in Mississippi, the rules for a black boy were entirely different and far more dangerous than in their Chicago neighborhood. Emmett, however, was a typical teenager. He insisted everything would be fine. He couldn't see past the excitement of traveling to a new place and spending time with cousins. Before Emmett boarded the train, Mamie sat him down for what she called a crash course in hatred. It was a desperate attempt to prepare her 14-year-old for the realities of the Jim Crow South. She told Emmett that down there, he had to yes sir and no ma'am every white adult he met. She instructed him to always step off the sidewalk and lower his head if a white woman was walking by, never to look any of them in the eye. If he ever found himself confronted by white men, she said, he should drop to his knees if he had to, whatever it took to show he wasn't a threat. Imagine having to tell your barely teenage son to humble himself to the point of crawling just to stay alive. Mamie was trying, in a 1-hour talk, to inoculate her son with the fear that she had known all her life. How do you give a crash course in hatred to a boy who has only ever known love? She later reflected, pained by the memory of that conversation. She could see that Emmett, who had grown up in comparatively tolerant Chicago, wasn't entirely sold. He listened, but she could tell he didn't truly grasp how important her warnings were. To him, it probably sounded like Mom worrying too much again. A few weeks later, Emmett Till's worst fears came to pass. Emmett was staying with his great uncle in Money, Mississippi, when local whites accused the boy of whistling at a white woman in a grocery store. The allegation was flimsy. By some accounts, Emmett merely whistled to himself, or perhaps showed a photograph of his integrated class to the woman, bragging that he had white friends. It didn't matter, just the idea that a black boy had flirted with a white woman was enough to seal his fate. In the dead of night, the woman's husband and his brother-in-law abducted Emmett from his relative's home. They beat him relentlessly, tortured him, and finally shot him in the head. His broken body, barely recognizable, was found dumped in a river a few days later. Emmett Till's lynching shocked the nation. The brutality inflicted on a 14-year-old for such a trivial supposed offense was staggering. His mother Mamie, in her grief, made a courageous decision. She held an open casket funeral so the world could see what had been done to her child. Photographs of Emmett's disfigured face were published in black newspapers and magazines, lighting a fire under the nascent civil rights movement. But if Emmett's death galvanized activists, it also absolutely terrified black parents everywhere. Here was the ultimate horror story to justify every anxious warning ever uttered. A boy had gone to spend time with family friends. Essentially, a supervised visit. Not even a true sleepover with strangers. And he never came home. He didn't break any serious rules. In fact, by all accounts, he tried to follow his mother's instructions. Yet he was still murdered in cold blood. And his killers walked away free. An all-white Mississippi jury acquitted the two men who killed Emmett, barely even deliberating on the case. They literally laughed and lit cigars in the courtroom after the verdict. Protected by double jeopardy, those men later publicly admitted their guilt in a magazine interview, knowing they couldn't be tried again. Stories like Emmett Till's seared themselves into the African-American collective memory. Emmett Till was far from the only black mother to have such premonitions. Throughout the Jim Crow era and long after, black parents had to think about risks that others didn't. If their child was away from home, especially overnight or in a largely white environment, what might happen? Could a miscommunication, a prank, or a mundane teenage mistake result in the child being hurt or killed? Could they be falsely accused of something terrible? The answer, history had shown, was yes. It happened often enough to keep black parents in a permanent state of alert. Even when outright racial violence wasn't a daily occurrence, the segregationist system provided countless opportunities for harm. During those decades, simply traveling as a black person required care and planning. There were towns known as sundown towns where a posted sign might as well have read, "If you're black, don't let the sun set on you here." Blacks who lingered after dark in those places could be harassed, beaten, or lynched with impunity. It was common knowledge that if a black family was driving cross-country, they couldn't just stop anywhere to rest for the night. They had to strategize where it was safe to eat, get gas, or lodge, because many establishments would refuse service. Or worse, by 1936, a guidebook was published to help black travelers navigate this minefield. It was called the Negro Motorist Green Book, and it listed hotels, restaurants, and homes where black travelers were welcome. By 1936, a guidebook was published to help black travelers navigate this minefield. It was called the Negro Motorist Green Book, and it listed hotels, restaurants, and homes where black travelers were welcome. The Green Book became the Bible of black travel during Jim Crow, an indispensable safety net for vacationing families and traveling salesmen alike. The need for it was stark. If a black traveler took a wrong turn and ended up in the wrong town at night, they could be attacked or even killed, and local authorities often wouldn't bother to investigate. That is how deadly a lapse in vigilance could be. Understanding this context, one starts to see how deep the roots of caution go. Black Americans learned that staying alive and unharmed often meant staying together and staying watchful. The home, one's own home, was the safest haven, because outside of it lay a world that had to be approached warily. A black mother in 1940s might let her children play with neighborhood kids in the yard, but send them across town to spend the night? Never. Not unless she knew every person in that other household, like family. And even then, with hesitation. By the mid-20th century, these protective habits had solidified into a sort of unwritten rule in many black communities. We take care of our own, and we don't entrust our children to just anyone. Sleepovers, as they became popular in mainstream American culture, often just didn't happen for black kids, especially not in white homes. If black children had slumber parties, they tended to be among cousins or close family friends, where everyone knew each other well. The memory of countless racial injustices quietly guided these choices. Every black parent who had lain awake at night until the son or daughter walked safely through the door understood that their anxiety was not imaginary. It was tragically well-founded. Even in the 1980s and 1990s, when many of today's parents were growing up, there were shocking incidents that reminded everyone why that vigilance was still necessary. Take the case of Yusuf Hawkins in 1989. He was a 16-year-old black teenager in New York City who one August night went with a couple of friends to a predominantly white neighborhood in Brooklyn to look at a used car that was advertised for sale. It was a simple errand on neutral ground, or so it seemed. What Yusuf and his friends didn't know was that at that very moment, a large group of young white men in the neighborhood had gathered, apparently expecting a different black teen who they believed was dating a local white girl. When Yusuf walked down the street, the mob swarmed around him and his friends. About 30 white youths, some wielding baseball bats, encircled these unwitting visitors. In the chaos, one of the white attackers shot Yusuf Hawkins dead on the spot. His friends escaped, but Yusuf lost his life for absolutely nothing, simply for being black and in the wrong place. The murder of Yusuf Hawkins sent shockwaves through New York. It ignited protests and fierce conversations about racism in the liberal North. For black communities everywhere, it was a gut-wrenching reminder. Even now, our children are not safe out there. A black parent in the early 90s, watching the news of Yusuf's killing or the beating of Rodney King or any number of hate crimes, would hold their children a little closer and think twice about letting them out of direct supervision. The message remained: the world can still be dangerous for you, especially if you stand out. Of course, not every threat is as blatant as a mob with bats. Often the dangers are quieter, but still damaging. By the late 20th century, many black children were attending predominantly white schools and making friends of different races. This was a positive change in society, yet it introduced new dilemmas at home. When a black kid befriends a white classmate, inevitably the invitation comes. Can I go over to Jimmy's house? Can I stay the night? White parents might encourage such exchanges without a second thought, believing in colorblind friendship. But black parents had to weigh factors that their white counterparts didn't. Who are these people? Do they have racial biases? Would they truly look after my child as their own? Because if something goes wrong, even unintentionally, the black child could suffer disproportionately. As the 21st century progressed, the context continued to evolve. High-profile cases of racial bias and violence kept making headlines. Trayvon Martin, a black teen, was shot dead in 2012 while simply walking through a neighborhood at night. In 2014, Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old black boy, was killed by police in Cleveland for playing with a toy gun in a park. These were not sleepover situations, but they reinforced a chilling reality. Black youth often aren't given the benefit of the doubt in public or unfamiliar spaces. Black parents absorb these events almost physically as stress and resolve. They double down on teachings like don't run in public, don't play around with toy guns, don't put yourself in a position where someone can misinterpret your actions. And yes, if I don't know those people, you're not going to their house. By the mid-2000s, even as American life became more diverse, a quiet understanding still held firm in many black homes. It might be summed up as, we cannot parent exactly like white parents do, because the world doesn't treat black kids like white kids. A white mom or dad might feel comfortable letting their son roam the neighborhood on a bike or crash at a new friend's house, assuming everything will be fine. Black parents hope for the best too, but they plan for the worst. This protective outlook isn't an indictment of every non-black household. It's a survival strategy bred from experience. And tragically, sometimes even the most vigilant caution can prevent a nightmare scenario from unfolding. On the evening of November 3rd, 2018, Tamla Hosford tucked her 5 children into bed and headed out for a rare night of grown-up fun. Tamla was a 40-year-old black woman living in Forsyth County, Georgia. She had been invited to an adult sleepover by a white acquaintance, a fellow football mom from the local youth sports league. The plan was to celebrate the friend's birthday with a small group of moms from the football team, have some drinks and laughs, and spend the night so no one would have to drive home late. It was the kind of casual, innocent gathering that happens in suburbs everywhere. Tamla's husband wasn't keen on her going. Perhaps he felt a bit of that same old worry, but Tamla reassured him. She even cooked dinner for her family before she left, packing an overnight bag with pajamas and a bottle of her favorite tequila to share at the party. She arrived at the house around 10 p.m., ready to enjoy herself. At the party, there were around a dozen people, including the birthday girl, several other women, and a couple of men. Tamla was the only black person in attendance. By all accounts, the night started off well. The group watched a football game on TV, played cards, and drank. Tamla, known for her bubbly and energetic personality, was in good spirits. People later said she was the life of the party, dancing and laughing. Yes, she was drinking. Her blood alcohol level would later be found to be quite high, roughly 3 times the legal limit for driving. But the curious thing is that none of the other guests recalled Tamla appearing dangerously drunk Photos and videos from earlier in the evening showed her smiling and steady on her feet. There were no reports of arguments or any tension. Sometime after midnight, Tamla changed into her cozy pajamas, a white onesie covered in paw print designs, and she called her husband to say goodnight. This was going to be a harmless sleepover among football moms, until it suddenly wasn't. By the next morning, Tamla Husford was dead. A little before 7:30 a.m. on November 4th, the homeowner's aunt looked into the backyard and saw Tamla's body lying on the grass, face down, not moving. Panicked screams and confusion erupted. The 911 call came in at 8:59 a.m., placed by the homeowner's boyfriend. He reported that Tamla was lying in the yard, not breathing, and even mentioned a small cut on her wrist, speculating absurdly that it might be self-inflicted. When sheriff's deputies arrived, they found Tamla exactly as described, clad in her fleece onesie, face down on the lawn under the home's elevated back deck. Her legs were stretched out straight behind her, one arm at her side and one arm bent above her head, as if she had fallen and landed in a peculiar position. The local authorities in Forsyth County wasted little time formulating a theory. The initial conclusion was that Tamla must have accidentally fallen from the second-story deck in the middle of the night. The sheriff's report posited that perhaps she went outside for a cigarette and in her inebriated state tumbled over the railing, plummeting about 14 feet to the ground. There were no eyewitnesses to any fall. Everyone else at the party claimed to have gone to bed by around 1 or 2 a.m., leaving Tamla as possibly the last one awake. If she slipped outside alone for a smoke, no one saw her again until her body was discovered at dawn. At first glance, it could seem like a horrific accident, a tragic misstep by someone who'd had too much to drink. But from the moment Tamla's family heard this account, they did not buy it. And as more facts emerged, a lot of people found the drunken fall explanation highly suspicious. For one, Tamla's friends and relatives insisted she was not the kind of person to get sloppy drunk, especially not around people she was just getting to know. Never ever ever have I seen my sister sloppy drunk and incoherent, Tamla's sister later said. So I doubt that she would pick a sleepover with people she was just getting to know to start behaving that way. In other words, yes, Tamla enjoyed drinks, but she kept her wits about her. The implication is clear. Something doesn't add up about her suddenly becoming so intoxicated that she'd accidentally flip over a railing. Then there were Tamla's injuries. The autopsy revealed a litany of trauma that seemed excessive for a one-story fall. She had a broken neck. She had a laceration on her heart. There were blunt force injuries to her head, bleeding on her brain, and severe damage to her torso and extremities. Her right wrist was dislocated. Her legs and arms had numerous cuts and abrasions. If one imagines someone simply losing balance and falling over a deck rail, it's hard to picture how they would end up with all of these injuries. Particularly strange was the detail noted about her face. Tamla was found face down, and when investigators rolled her over, they noticed her head hadn't been tilted to the side at all. It was straight down, as if she had fallen like a plank. Typically, a falling person might reflexively turn or twist, or after landing their head, might end up at an angle. Tamla's posture in death struck her family as odd. Equally troubling were those small cuts on her wrists and hands, which Tamla's family believed could be defensive wounds, the kind of injuries one might get fending off an attack. How would an accidental fall cause that? To them, it looked more like she might have been in a struggle. The circumstances around the investigation only fueled these suspicions. It turned out that the scene was not handled like a potential crime at all. The morning Tamla was found, chaos and confusion reigned for a while. The homeowner's boyfriend, a man named Jose Barrera, who incidentally worked in the court system, admitted to moving Tamla's arm and leg as she lay there, saying he wanted to see if she was alive. He also confessed to picking up a fallen cigarette and a lighter from the deck and tidying them away before police got there. That alone was alarming. Crucial evidence, like the position of objects, may have been disturbed. Yet the responding officers didn't seem to mind. They quickly accepted the story that Tamla was alone outside and fell. They didn't secure the home as a possible crime scene. They didn't tape off the area or immediately interview all the party guests with skepticism. In fact, no thorough forensic work was done, no fingerprint dusting, no collection of fingernail scrapings or a rape kit, nothing. It's as if the authorities collectively shrugged and said, well, she was drunk and fell. Cases closed. This was despite the fact that Forsyth County, where this occurred, has a notorious past of racial intimidation. It had been an all-white sundown county for most of the 20th century, and despite Tamla being the only black person present in a house full of white partygoers. One might think, given those optics, investigators would be exceedingly careful to rule out foul play. Instead, they appeared to rush to the easiest conclusion. In the weeks and months after Tamla Horsford's death, her family fought tirelessly to get answers. They pointed out every inconsistency they could. The early 911 call mentioned that small cut on Tamla's wrist, almost as if planting the idea that she killed herself, which her family vehemently rejected. The time gap between the body being found and the call being made was puzzling. The witness found her at 7:30 a.m., but 911 wasn't called until 8:59 a.m. What happened in that hour and a half? The party guest statements contained little discrepancies too. Nothing concrete, but enough oddness that a reasonable person could say, this deserves a closer look. Tamla's family hired their own attorney to press the matter. He, a seasoned lawyer named Ralph Fernandez, reviewed the autopsy and investigation files and concluded that the case was, in his words, compromised from start to finish. He cited the lack of preserved evidence and called the absence of standard autopsy photos unheard of. Fernandez stopped short of accusing any individual of murder. He simply laid out that the known facts strongly suggested foul play and that the truth might be forever obscured because the response was so botched. For a while, it looked like Tamla's story might simply fade away as another unresolved tragedy. But in mid-2020, something changed. That summer, the United States was rocked by massive protests against racial injustice, sparked by the killing of George Floyd and others. In the swell of the Black Lives Matter movement, past cases of racial controversy were re-examined by the public, and Tamla Horsford's death resurfaced on social media with the hashtag Tamla Horsford. People were demanding to know what really happened to Tam. Why wasn't this investigated properly? Celebrities tweeted about it, news outlets picked it up, and the pressure mounted on Forsyth County authorities. Bowing to public outcry, the sheriff announced that the case would be reopened and handed over to the state for a fresh investigation. In June 2020, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation began re-examining evidence and interviewing witnesses. Tamla's family felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps now they would get answers. Sadly, the second investigation concluded, like the first, that Tamla's death was accidental. By 2021, the GBI reported finding no proof of homicide. Many independent observers and Tamla's loved ones were left dissatisfied, unconvinced by this outcome. It's hard to shake the intuition that something went terribly wrong that night beyond a mere fall. None of this makes sense. None of it, Tamla's sister Summer said, her voice breaking when the case was discussed on national news. The lack of clarity, the lack of accountability, everything felt like a punch to the gut of a family already in agony. In their minds, not only had they lost Tamla, but the system had utterly failed her as well. For Black communities, the Hosford case became a modern parable reinforcing an old lesson. It was the embodiment of that latent fear so many had voiced. This is exactly why we don't like being in these situations. Being the only Black person in a setting can mean that if tragedy strikes, you might end up like Tamla, mourned by your family, championed by online activists, but officially written off with unanswered questions. On social media and blogs, Black commentators remarked bitterly that Tamla's fate was their nightmare scenario. The phrase, "Black people don't do sleepovers," was repeated not as a joke this time, but as a somber acknowledgement. This is why. It was a way of saying, do you see now? Do you see why our parents and we ourselves sometimes hesitate to join your camps, your house parties, your overnight trips? It's not about lacking trust or love. It's about the very real possibilities that we could end up in a situation where we're vulnerable and no one has our back. In Tamla's case, whether foul play occurred or not, she was unquestionably vulnerable as the sole Black person in a house full of partiers. And when she died, the pursuit of truth on her behalf was, many believe, lackluster at best. That reality sent a chill through Black parents everywhere. It was like a 21st century confirmation of their grandparents' warnings. In the end, every parent wants to kiss their child goodnight, knowing they will wake up safe and sound. For Black parents, ensuring that often means keeping their children close when darkness falls. It's a bittersweet reality, but it is their reality. And now, having heard their stories, we can all understand the hidden reason, which really wasn't hidden at all. So the next time you hear someone casually mention that their Black friend never got to do sleepovers, or see a viral joke about strict Black moms and dads, remember what underpins it. Under the humor lies history. Under the firmness lies fear. And under the fear lies profound love. Black people don't do sleepovers because far too often they have had to lie awake through long nights of injustice. Until the dawn of true equality arrives, they choose caution in the darkness. Understanding this, we can all hope and work for a future where no parent of any color has to feel that extra pang of worry, where every child's sleepover really is just innocent fun. Until then, when a Black parent says, "because I said so," we finally know what they mean. No, it's not an end of a conversation. It's the start of one that America has been needing to hear. If this story resonated with you, kindly take a moment to like this video. Subscribe to our channel so these conversations can keep going. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below with your own experience or reflections. Your voice matters. And together, these stories reach further than silence ever could. Thank you for watching.